Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, this is a channel about Dungeons and Dragons. We try and take a darker tone with all the things we do here. So if you like edgier kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe. If you like what we see here, please support us on Patreon. The link is in the description. This week's video, we're going to talk about the Drow. The Drow have a long, rich history, and it's a great, wonderful story. If you're into elves and their lore, definitely read through it. It's all about their god Corellian and Lolth and how that division happened and everything in between. A lot of powerful deities are etched in that story. It's definitely worth looking into, especially if you're considering some for patrons, deities, or anything of the sort. A few things about Drow society. It is very hard, the society. It is very difficult. You are trained to be strong. You are trained not to be weak. And you kind of really have to fend for yourselves at all times. You don't really have friends. You just have people you need to eliminate to get further ahead. It is very ambitious, their society. They're very, very into backstabbing each other and getting away with whatever they could to become the strongest. It's a very matriarchal society. So a drow woman and a drow man have different positions of power and are really, really expressed in how they do things and how they evolve, and should really be something you take into consideration when making your character. They are deadly. They are scary. They are really, really menacing entities in the world. And that reputation will follow you wherever you go. So keep that in mind, because I happen to love playing them simply because I like characters that have that like the world already dislikes you. And now you have to adapt to how you need to act. You need to either be pleasing, overtly pleasing, or you have to be deceptively pleasing, or you have to be aggressive and show no weakness. Like, you get to weigh those options with almost every interaction, because that matters to you. There is a lot of drow pride that exists within their society. They believe themselves to be the greatest, and they really, really try to prove that. And they have a horrid history of enslaving basically anything that can move, and they are terrible to other creatures, and especially hate other elves. So it's a good thing to consider, and definitely work that dynamic, especially if you're in a party with more than one elf, especially of a different kind, particularly high elves. The player's handbook elves all gain a certain number of abilities that are across the board equal, because there are 3 divisions of elves in that book: the wood elves, the high elves, and the drow. They all get +2 to dexterity. They get trance, which is their sleeping ability, which is that they don't actually go to sleep. They enter this trance for 4 hours where they can still remain semi-conscious, so they can be alert and can watch out. The interesting thing about trance is it's not just a rest for them. And you really got to see how in-depth this gets. But ultimately what trance does, it gives them an opportunity to replay moments in their life, where it goes back to specific moments, almost like having an eidetic memory, where you can see things perfectly. A big thing about the lore is that elves are kind of aloof, and they'll stare at things for hours and just kind of be amazed at like something simple as a flower. When they enter trance, they revisit that memory, and they can see that flower perfectly as if they're holding it right now. It's a great thing thematically. I like the idea of, if you're knowing you're going into a party, reliving training, maybe military training or whatever it was that brought you to where you are, in an attempt to kind of hone your skills and refresh your memory on experiences and things like that, and really bring yourself to that like I'm preparing for something great. And it's a great way to add depth to what it means to be an elf, because you don't actually sleep. Like, you just remember and you relive. And if you're a super, super young elf, you remember your past life before you were brought from the elven eternal rest to the material plane. And you can relive those moments where you're with all of your ancestors and with other deities, and it's this beautiful moment for you that you're going to slowly lose. Or if you're a drow and you're born and you're super, super young, all you see is blackness. And it's just dark. And there's just like this no aspect of an actual afterlife, or where you came from, or where your soul belongs. And it adds that like frightening feel to it. Like, what if it's the first time, you really look back at the past and you just saw darkness, and it traumatized you, and that brought your character somewhere, and now you're scared and doing everything in your power not to die because that empty darkness just frightens you so much. And you know it's coming because that's where you come from. That's where you go when you die. That it really adds this weight to a new dynamic that people very rarely get the opportunity to touch on, but maybe that could be a motivating part of your character, which is, I think, very, very cool. And they also get Fey Ancestry, which means they have advantage on any saving throws against being charmed, and you can't magically be put to sleep again because you don't actually sleep, you enter that trance. Those are inherent to all elves, and Drow's got a couple of different things that some of the other elves don't, which we're going to cover now. Drow from the player's handbook and a +1 to the charisma bonus. A lot of people are using Tasha's now, so they're mixing and matching those ability score bonuses to whatever they want to. But just know that the charisma score increase is an inherent Drow part of them, because they are based solely on who they are and the belief in themselves and their own personal strength. And that kind of confidence is kind of where charisma comes from, at least in my mind. There's a certain connection between the two of them that helps bring forth being like this charismatic kind of a person. Even being intimidating or scary is all part of the same thing. That's why it's a charisma skill. So they also gain superior dark vision. All elves gain dark vision of up to 60 feet, where Drow gain dark vision up to 120 feet. I don't know if you've ever played a Shadow Sorcerer or any other class or subclass that has that increased range, but it is very, very exciting to have that, because if you're a ranged kind of a character, you're a spellcaster, you're like using a longbow or something, that extra feet almost gives you advantage, because almost everything else can only see about 60 feet. So as long as you can hit within that range, you're shooting with advantage, because they can't see you and you're an unseen attacker. You keep out of that range in that nice like 70-foot area, that's free reign to do a lot of damage without a lot of risk. It's a very powerful thing, and it's very, very good considering how often you're in dungeons, you're in castles, you're in caves and stuff like that, and you're just surrounded by these dark, entrenching areas. There's a lot of strategy to have there. All you really need is a couple of good range attacks and you're set. One of the cool things about being Drow is because you have charisma, a lot of the times being a warlock would really work in your benefit, because now you can have Eldritch Blast, and now you can fire multiple times out of range of the enemies seeing you, giving yourself advantage and having the availability to rock out with a good amount of safety and nothing that anybody else can really do about it. The downside of this superior dark vision is you gain sunlight sensitivity, where you have disadvantage on attack rolls and perception checks that rely on sight when you, the target of the attack, or whatever you're trying to perceive, is in direct sunlight. This sounds more daunting than it actually is. I've played Drow a bunch of times. A lot of the times you're not standing in direct sunlight unless you happen to be in a desert. There's always trees or something going on, or shade that you can stand in, or whatever it is. And you do have ways to offset that disadvantage depending on what you are. Maybe if you're a caster, you might pick up something like Acid Splash, where having advantage or disadvantage just doesn't affect the roll whatsoever. Or you just make sure to do something that puts you outside of direct sunlight. Maybe wear a sombrero or a big hat or something. Or you make sure to manipulate your circumstances to find shade in areas, or to try and work out circumstances where things don't have to be at high noon when you're fighting or running around. But a lot of the times you're in dungeons, you're in caves, you're in ancient keeps, you're in other dimensions. Like, there's a lot going on in Dungeons and Dragons where this shouldn't be too much of an issue for you to be able to overcome. The Drow have their own weapon training as part of their abilities. It is integral to who the Drow are, the kinds of weapons that they use, and it kind of reflects on their class. As they are elvish in nature, these are dexterity based, which is something you should really consider, even if you're going with a class that might be using heavy armor. It is a rapier, a short sword, and a hand crossbow. A lot of these Drow entities tend to be very like guerrilla fighters. Like they're very skirmish and whittle down and then swarm. Like it's It's a very great tactic, especially considering most of their fighting tends to be either capturing people to bring them back into the Underdark or actually fighting in the Underdark, where a lot of it is very based on knowing the terrain and being smart enough just to kind of pick off whatever you can before you have to risk your fighters actually going in. Which is why everything's light, everything's quick, everything's fast moving, and everything's kind of dexterity based. So you want to kind of be that kind of quick entity, and that's kind of why you have this proficiency here. It's kind of a guide, because a lot of the times if you pick a class, it's going to provide you with these weapons if you're capable of using them, or whatever is going to bring you to use that kind of a weapon, or melee weapons or ranged attacks. You're going to have something that's going to give you those weapons anyway. This is a guide. Very often, are you going to be using a rapier as a wizard? Unless you're a blade singer, probably not. So this really is going to affect that. Are you going to use a rapier as a sorcerer? Probably not, unless you're a very specific kind of sorcerer. But a lot of this is going to be inherent to just giving you that base foundation of what a drow is, and giving you the ability to stick to that and to really keep to the lore of what they are and how they fight and their own tactics, which I happen to like. I think that's really great. It's a great way to make it cohesive. The final drow ability you get is drow magic. You know the Dancing Lights cantrip. When you reach 3rd level, you can cast Fairy Fire spell once with this trait, and regain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. When you reach 5th level, you can cast the Darkness spell once, and regain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. Charisma is your spellcasting modifier for these spells. A couple of things on Dancing Lights. I really like this cantrip. Yeah, it's great that you can throw out 4 orbs of light and use that to shed light in an area, so in case anybody doesn't have dark vision, they can see. But my favorite thing about it is using it and making a medium-sized, vaguely humanoid creature of light, of like embers, because it's going to be 5 feet tall. Make that standing in a fire. Make it move, and make it draw enemies to you. There'll be encampments where you see people. You'll see fires before you see usually monsters and things like that from turning corners and lights. It's a great way to bring some things out, draw attention, move them in a way that's advantageous to you. Maybe give yourself that opportunity to have that actual wonderful surprise round attack on your enemy. You can actually pull off an ambush by drawing them closer, and this is a great way to do that. I happen to just really like that cantrip. I understand a lot of people don't really see the use of it, but again, as a drow, you have 120-foot dark vision. Dancing Lights has really got to be used specifically for something, and I like to think of it as devious in purpose and nature. Fairy Fire. This spell gets overlooked a lot. I don't know why. Basically, anything that fails to save is going to be covered in this multicolored like goo, and you'll have advantage on hitting it. This will offset your sunlight sensitivity. That's what it's there for. Throw it in a big pool of enemies that are close together so you can hit as many as possible, because if your charisma is not high enough, you might hit at least 1 or 2, and that'll be your force of attack for those rare opportunities that you are in direct sunlight. It'll work. It just, if you hit a big enough pool, someone will fail. If you're charisma based, or if you're like a paladin, or if you're like a hexblade, or some awesome, insane sorcerer build, yeah, throw this out there and just run up and start attacking anyway. This will give you that offsuit to that balance, and this will make it work significantly better in your favor. This is built to counterattack sunlight sensitivity. Enjoy the spell, use the spell. You get it at 3rd level. You should be throwing it out once a day on like routine. And then Darkness is great because, simply put, throw it on the enemy. Make them not know where they're going and force them to the front. Force them to pool up, and that way you can just lay waste with AoE attacks or bottleneck them or whatever it is. Don't use Darkness purely to throw on yourself because you somehow managed to gain magical dark vision. Use it to disorient the enemy and pull them closer. It's a great tactic because you're just all of a sudden surrounded in a void and you can't see. It's just impossible to see through. So you have to run out and find vision. And when you do that, you're not ready to get smashed by whatever the hell happens to be standing on an opposite side. So your friends just ready their actions for whatever comes out, and then smash as soon as they pop out. That's a huge amount of damage given to them right away. And they have no offensive capabilities because they can't see anything. Almost everything in the game requires you to be able to see which way you're going, unless they're all just happen to be casting lightning bolt. The Drow have this wonderful place in the lore of Dungeons and Dragons where they are scary. One Drow, lore-wise, should be able to take out 15 soldiers. Like, it's that kind of imposing of an evil when you see Drow. They are scary, they are tough, they are crafty, and they only get wildly eviler the darker you go. They are so built inherently different from other elves, where elves are more like whimsical and like aloof, and they just like everything almost doesn't have a severe level of importance to them because everything is fleeting time wise, and they have such longevity. They have time to get around to it, and if they don't, it's not that big of a deal. They'll just come back and do it later. But to a Drow, everything is a fight. If you make a plan, you have to be prepared for the contingency plans of other Drow seeing your weakness or seeing you exposed and attacking and taking everything you've loved, including your life. And that is what you're built around. That's what your whole nature is. That's what's paranoia is, this integral to who they are. They are confident, they are scary, they are militant in their ideas, they do not waste time, they are not aloof, they are not happy-go-lucky hippie like elves. Everything has purpose, and if it doesn't have purpose and you're not working towards your goal, you're going to get killed by someone who is. So that real like ambition and this desire to keep pushing and to drag your teammates kicking and screaming across the finish line, that's Drow. That is who they are. They are very strong characters. They're great for evil leadership type characters. If you want to be a tyrant like character, it is great to be a Drow. It works so well because you pull such weight from just being what you are and having such pride in the dark and evilness that's tied to who you are. And don't get me wrong, you can play a good Drow. You can be just like Dritz. There's a whole sect of Drow that revolts against the teachings of Lolth, and I forget the Drow deity that they worship, but she's specifically a Drow deity who's supposed to be about peace and like music and creation, and they change the way a lot of Drow are thinking, and they try and build that world better for them and like bring back the availability to be at peace. I don't ever play that because I'd rather be evil and dark and just vicious because that's just fun. But a lot of people have the availability to do that. There's a lot of lore behind that, so it works that you can build that straight to your campaigns or pull that into however your worlds or whatever homebrew worlds you happen to be in. Because obviously you don't always have to be evil, but if you're here, you probably want to be. So take that into consideration. There's so much about seeing weakness in other races that you is inherent to you, because you've just been the biggest slave traders in the entire Dungeons and Dragons world. Like, you see all the races, you know their strengths, you know their weaknesses because you force them to work until they die. Like, there's such a great wealth of knowledge that exists for Drow because of all this longevity and all this darkness and all this world that you've seen create, and now you were shunted against it. Now you live in the Underdark. And the Underdark is massive, and it is deadly, and it is dangerous. And no one else can really survive there except for a handful of races. And they're all at war, and Drow maintain superiority. Like, it's very, very cool to have that kind of connection, that kind of like longevity to basically almost being rulers of an entire world and fighting your way through to the top, or just trying to escape your own world. Like, whatever it is, like, you can be evil and still want to be just away from all the other evil. There's so much opportunity with Drow. There's such great joy in being one and being free from being after being good all the time and seeing other things as just a pragmatic issue that can be solved with might and tactics is awesome. And it's so much fun being them. They look awesome. So definitely give them a chance if you haven't already. Thank you so much if you made it this far into the video. We're going to bring this to a close. Please like, share, subscribe. Please keep commenting. I want to hear your Drow stories and how great you had of a time being them and how awesome it was to mix in with other characters and other classes and really bring that to the forefront. Please, if you are able, please support us on Patreon. It's awesome to be able to have anybody helping out and help bring the channel to that next level. And again, thank you all for giving a Spooky Kid a chance.